Welcome to the Messy City Podcast, where we talk with the people who design, plan, build, develop, or even just think about how to create beautiful, successful, and humane cities and towns. Let's learn from each other and create places we truly care about. Welcome back to the Messy City Podcast. This is Kevin Klinkenberg. Every once in a while, you have a chance to do something on social media, if you're lucky, that goes a little bit viral. We all, I guess, have different standards of what viral is. But I did a little thread last week about a trip that I took to Las Catalinas in Costa Rica with my wife. It was part of not the entire part of our trip to Costa Rica, but it was about half of it. And I posted some comments about it and just thoughts that it made me have about architecture and development and new urbanism. So fortunately, it went a little bit viral, which was kind of cool to see. And even more fortunately, I was able to get Charles Brewer on the line here today, who is the developer of Las Catalinas and somebody I've known for quite a few years, to talk about the project. And we'll talk about some other things as well. But thanks so much, Charles, for joining us. I'm super looking forward to having this conversation.
Well, me too. I need the trip report.
Well, I think you'll enjoy it. I'll say there was a moment where just to make everybody insanely jealous, when we were on the rooftop pool at the hotel, which is this kind of lovely infinity pool overlooking the ocean. And we're sitting there and we're like, kind of the old Anthony Bourdain line came to mind, which was, yeah, this doesn't suck. So being in a beautiful place like that and having that opportunity. So Charles, actually, there's a lot of stuff I'd like to talk about. I do like to always start by having people understand a little bit about the person that I'm talking to and sort of your journey to being here. And I know you've had an interesting journey, and I don't know if you remember this, but I actually met you. The first time I met you was at the Seaside Institute seminar that you and I both went to, which must have been around 2002 or three, something like that. That was one of those sort of weekend seminars that Andreas used to put together and Seaside Institute used to put together. That was sort of new urbanism, like 101. And you were coming out of your previous professional life at that time and getting interested in new urbanism. I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about that and what led you to kind of come towards wanting to develop, do real estate development at all.
Temporary insanity. I don't know. At the Seaside Institute, was that the time I played the guitar?
I think it was, yeah.
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 I had some new urbanism songs. They never quite hit the charts, but they were kind of fun. Yeah, well, I had a very successful internet company called Mindspring Enterprises back in the 90s. And the whole thing had happened so fast. From beginning to end, it was only 6 years for me. And in 2020, we merged with another company. And then after a few months after that, I left. And so I had, my career was just sort of at a dead stop. Had been a very all-in consuming thing. And I had to figure out what to do next. And I was thinking sort of vaguely I might do something that was positive for the environment, because I'd spent most of the 90s as an avid whitewater kayaker, and I'd always been just sort of an outdoorsy kind of guy, I guess. And a local architect, got wind of that and called me up and told me about new urbanism, which I'd never even heard of as a topic. And I said, well, if I want to learn more about this, what do I read? And he said, read Suburban Nation, which was a new book at the time. And it's a very simple book, as you know. I mean, I read it all that night.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just sort of instantly hooked because I've always had, just personally, a real love for walkable places that are fun to explore and where it's sort of naturally sociable. Uh, I never really thought that much about what would be involved in making one until that moment. But it turns out that the concepts around how to do it are so clear and simple and compelling. I just was hooked, and I couldn't help myself. I've been working on it ever since.
So I'll dredge up some things from the reservoir, the memory reservoir here, just to get your reaction. But I remember, one of the things that you talked about at that time, and back in the old days when a lot of us were on those email listservs together. Um, you used the phrase that new urbanism is the next internet. I don't know if you remember that. Uh,
I don't. I cannot confirm or deny. I'm not sure what I would have meant.
well, I think reaching back, what struck me in our conversations, and then just the back and forth that you would have on those listservs, was that you felt like the opportunity was immense for new urbanism, and so this was after .com 1.0, and I'm curious now because it's been 20 years or so since all that, and your reflections on we'll talk about your projects in a little bit. I'm curious about your reflections about thinking about the opportunity of neurourbanism now that you've had the chance to do a couple projects, and successes or failures overall.
Well, the concepts of mixing and uses and walkability are certainly way more mainstream than they were back then. So, in that sense, I think you could say that new urbanism has been a great success. Um, in terms of it creating places that I personally find to be really lovable or appealing, not so much of a success.
Mhm.
If, for example, I live sort of immediately adjacent to Midtown Atlanta, which has been following a blueprint for good walkable mixed use development for over 20 years, and a tremendous amount of this development has happened. Tower after tower after tower. Most of it has been reasonably high rise, and that which is not truly high rise is sort of this, more the wrapped deck mid rise kind of thing. And it had, for me, it has utterly failed in creating an environment that I find to be fun and interesting, and a place that I want to go.
Mhm.
And that's a completely personal comment, and not everybody would feel the same way. But for me, the scale is just off. Uh, the buildings are huge and sort of antiseptic. Uh, in some places, the streets, in terms of their design, are better, but still not great for the most part. If you go walking around Midtown, you do not see very many pedestrians. I mean, it's kind of a mystery to me. There's so many people living there and working there, but it doesn't turn into a vibrant street life. And I, in a way, so much so that I find it baffling. Um, and I think that's just one example, but in general, I think what has sort of come to be the main modern or current way of implementing these concepts of mixing uses and walkability and all, the scale is wrong. A project isn't one 8 unit 4 story building of flats. It's 572 units in a 5 story building wrapped around a deck, or in a tower. And in either case, in terms of creating something that's really appealing and lovable, I think it's a failure.
Yeah, yeah. I I probably upset a few friends of mine at one of the CNUs not too long ago when we were talking about codes and form-based codes in particular, and I said, I understand we're all like excited that we can make a list and we've had 300 form-based codes adopted, whatever, nationwide. Um, and I don't want to minimize anybody's work on it because I wrote some of those too and worked on it hard for years and for a time really believed in it. But the reality was, like, if we thought of that as like a company, if that was like a startup and over 20 plus years, we just had a few hundred localized codes adopted and in a country with 19,000 municipalities or whatever, then I think we would consider it a failure. Uh,
Yeah,
And
it really
I'm not saying it's like all our fault. I'm just saying it's like trying to assess what actually scales and works and what doesn't.
right, right. There are. I've done a lot of road trips around the United States in recent years. It's something that my son and I do, and uh, there are places that we will stumble across that are just sort of shockingly nice
Hmm.
and good that you would have never heard of. One prominent example that probably a lot of people might know is Bentonville, Arkansas.
Hmm.
And I happen to go to that one because it's a mountain biking hub.
Oh yeah, big one.
Uh,
Yeah.
but the downtown in Bentonville, which is basically the historic thing that was there, it's built around the square. Uh, you know, and yeah, I'm sure it has had a lot of progress and sort of in making it a dynamic, great place to be. But it's been a building at a time.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this might be driven by a few wealthy people, perhaps Walmart heirs, and it might be kind of an isolated, hard to replicate, uh, sort of example. But it's great. It's great, and it does not have those oversized uh, elements like the 500 unit wrap deck apartment building and things like that just they just don't work. They just in terms of creating a lovable place. They just don't work.
Yeah. Well, let's get into something how you approach that as a problem solver when you started doing projects. And uh, your first really prominent project, I guess, was Glenwood Park in Atlanta.
Right.
Uh, and talk a little bit about what you thought about, like how you came to doing that project, um, and how you assess how well it was done.
I think it was done incredibly well. I was there just an hour ago on my bike. Um, it's 20 years old now. The trees are big. It looks great. Uh, I would characterize it as a great example of mainstream newer urbanism. You know, we worked hard to keep the dimensions of the street appealing. We followed the well-established principles of street design and dimensions. The buildings are all 4 stories or less. It's a mix of houses, townhouses, and then mixed-use buildings with retail ground floors and then condominiums above. Um, when we did build those, we built, I guess, 5 of those town center mixed-use buildings at once. But each one of them is a different building, you know, and they're similar in terms of their function and their program, but they all have different elements and different balconies and different windows and were designed by different people. Uh, and they're not wrapping parking decks. There is parking for the commercial that's sort of hidden around the back and the interior of the block, but it's not in a deck. Uh, the buildings have your front and back elevations and windows and everything. Um, there's a great downtown square. There's one park, which is, I guess, about an acre or so, but big enough to be. You have a playground, places people can throw or kick a ball around, and it it turned out great. It's 28 acres. I think we ended up with about 400 units. That's not exactly right. Don't quote that number, but
Mhm.
somewhere in that range. Um, and we really paid attention to the details. Uh, So all of that success, but in the end, it was seemed a little half baked to me. Uh, you know, the thing that's so compelling about building walkable places for me is the social experience and the life that I would hope that people can have in a place like that. Um, in particular, I've always been focused on the experience of kids. I'm old enough that when I was a kid, I had a lot of freedom. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you go out in the morning and be home by dinner.
Mm-hmm.
You maybe some vague notion of what my boundaries were that I was not to exceed. Um, and that was just so central to my whole life and upbringing. And it has vanished so completely and so suddenly from our society that it just hits me like a ton of bricks somehow. Like, how did that happen? Uh, and it seems like a shame to me because I would like children to be able to have you know, that sort of sense of freedom and ability to explore things uh, now, like I did back when.
Mm-hmm.
And in thinking about why and how that happened, there are all kind of things you can toss in there, including societal changes like mothers not being at home and more likely to be off working and other things. But in the end, it comes down to two things mainly for me, and they both have to do with cars. We don't let our kids have freedom because we're afraid they'll get run over
Mm-hmm.
and we're afraid they'll get kidnapped in a
Yeah.
car,
Yeah.
snatched and taken away in a car. So if you could just take the cars out of the immediate area where you want the kids to be able to have freedom, they should get it. That was my theory anyway. And you can see this at a small scale all over the place. If there's somewhere that's been built with maybe some restaurants and a little car-free area where there's a playground or something for the kids to do, parents will let them go. They're running around over the place. Maybe they're still kind of within eye shot, uh, but it happens. And in my travels, without exception, my favorite places are always the places without cars. Sometimes that's out in more of a wilderness setting, or a lot of times that might be in a park. But there are places within cities all over the place where just in some limited area there are no cars, and those always end up being my favorite places. So if that car-free area can include where your house actually is, then could my thinking was that kids could come out and parents would let them have freedom and they get to go and roam and do the things I used to be able to do. And so I got in my head to see if I could build a place like that. Um, in the meantime, and we're talking like '05, '06 here, uh, prices for the kind of land we built Glenwood Park on had gone up so much that it was going to be impossible to build Glenwood Park. You're going to be forced to be at least mid-rise, if not high-rise,
Mm-hmm.
which I just had no interest in doing. So I was, one way or another, I was being forced to go farther afield. And at the same time, I was frustrated, looking for places like that where we could take our family, and my kids were quite young at the time, and have that kind of experience. We'd had some really good experiences down at Seaside and other places down there at 30A. Uh, but it looking for a wintertime warm weather destination, so somewhere in a more tropical location, we could not find, I could not find what I thought to be a beautiful walkable beach town anywhere in the tropics. I mean, not even close.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent there are some attractive towns, they're port towns, but they're not beach towns. Uh, and so I got it into my head to try to find a place to build one and started shopping around. And lo and behold, eventually I did find the place. I've been working on it ever since.
And you're like, yeah, why not this 1,200 acres, on the ocean in Costa Rica?
Yeah, I started looking at the Caribbean, and which I was more familiar with, but thank God I did try to do it there. There are a lot of advantages for choosing Costa Rica. Culturally, it's pretty great. People really are nice and welcoming, and have values that align pretty well with mine. Um, and it's not a tiny little island. You
Hmm.
can get resources and workforce and materials in a way that's reasonably economic, which just not true at all for a lot of those tiny little islands.
Yeah. Yeah. So and I remember you talking about this years ago when you were um, starting to work on Las Catalinas, but what you just kind of described and your interest in a real pedestrian, primarily a pedestrian only kind of community, and the benefits of that, especially to families and children, that was really then the driving force for what you were trying to do originally at Las Catalinas.
That's right. And the fact that it is, we it's a town, or we aspire to have it be a town, always have. But it's not just a regular workaday town. It's a town based on resort
Mm.
activities, and I think that does give us some extra degrees of freedom. Anyway, that was part of my thinking. Hey, in a resort sort of location, we have a better shot of being able to pull this off than we would in just some normal, for example, Atlanta suburban location or something like that.
Yeah. So then, how does one go about starting to conceive of and build a new community that's, I don't know, 1,000 miles away or however far it is from where you were in Atlanta?
Well, we really had to start at the beginning. We didn't have topo maps. We didn't have any kind of development entitlements. So we had some sort of technical things that we had to do, which took a few years. It included gathering information about the property and then starting to design things. Um, for me, it was clear from the beginning that what we should aspire to is a relatively small, developed area surrounded by a big hunk of beautiful nature where we could enjoy hiking and biking and be surrounded by that nature. Uh, and, given it was also pretty obvious where the best places to build would be. So, uh, and we bought the land in '06. In '07, we had a master planning charrette. Uh, and to that, we invited a whole bunch of the leading new urbanist practitioners of that time and stayed for a week. Uh, and we started with sort of some level of a master plan, or at least sort of bubble diagrams of where we thought the prime development areas should be. Did that working with TSW here in Atlanta. And then what we hoped to do in the charrette was then to design the urbanism of all those areas,
Hmm.
which is what would normally happen in a flat ground or flattish ground new urbanist project. That's what happened at Glenwood Park. We had a charrette. It took a week, and basically we had the design. It
Yeah.
had to be tweaked over the subsequent months to, with the intricacies of some regulations and street widths and things like that. Well, in Los Angeles, it didn't work at all because our topography is pretty intense,
Uh huh.
and we had you getting that right at the level of compact urbanism that we were aspiring to is a pretty labor intensive thing. You almost have to uh, you draw every single building before you can fit them together
Hmm.
into a puzzle. Um, Douglas Dwaney was a major participant in those our planning efforts of those early days, and he would draw these beautiful, diagrams of tiny little, you know, roads or pathways, connecting things up the hillside. Um, but but that is, five houses at a time, 10 houses at a time. It's not, 1,200 acres at a time. So soon enough, I just concluded that that was impossible.
Yeah.
We couldn't do that, and we just have to take it bit by bit. And so we actually designed the neighborhood that we refer to now as Beachtown South. We designed that first, but of course, this was all happening in the context of the collapsing world economy and especially the collapsing of the resort real estate market
Hmm.
and especially of the resort real estate market in Costa Rica. So we had to sort of shift the scale of our ambitions from that, which was about 40 houses, to something much smaller. And so our initial increment ended up being 7 houses
Hmm.
and one restaurant and one shop, Pura Vida Ride, which is still there, and and one street. So this is all along Paseo del Mar, adjacent to the ocean, um, and that was done having very firmly in mind sort of the context of the rest of which was surrounded in that immediate neighborhood. Um, and so that was doable, and we did it. It was finished in the summer of 2011, and even with just that little bit, it was a pretty great experience. And there were enough people around because people were coming to enjoy the restaurant and the beach and the trails, and that there was more of a sense of life and more of a, as we used to say, a pulse at Las Catalinas than there were in big ambitious more conventional developments that might have been underway for 20 or 30 years, but was still just you know houses kind of scattered about, but in no one spot coming together in a way that there was any real energy. uh, the phrase somehow we came to use this: if you want to make a fire, you got to bring your embers together. um, and we had our embers, even though there were only 9 of them. We had them together, and it was pretty great right from the start. Um, and then from that point on, our growth from there was initially pretty slow. It was a difficult time in the market still for a while, but as the years gone by, we kind of picked up steam and started to build things in slightly bigger increments. Um, and so it's worked, but it's been a long and sometimes pretty difficult process.
Mhm. And now you're at the point where you've got I don't know how you would describe it, if one neighborhood or two neighborhoods that are pretty much complete, um, but certainly the whole beachfront area is more or less complete, and you're starting to
Yeah,
work now across the roadway.
right. The all of what we call Beach Town, which is 21 acres,
Okay.
is finished. I think there, well, there's a town hall site which remains just sort of a grassy patch for now, but it's actually pretty enjoyable as a grassy patch. But someday there may be a building there, and there's a little corner in the very far north along the beach where we have room to develop a little more. That's kind of in the Plaza Mercado commercial zone, but everything else is finished there. Uh, and it's, gosh, a couple hundred houses, 2 hotels. I think we have about 10 different restaurants. Uh, there's quite a lot to do in those 21 acres.
Yeah.
Most of it's car free. The very far southern bit on a street called Paseo Punta Pinca you can accommodate cars and people can have garages out there. It's a little farther from the center. And that's the pattern that we're continuing in the next phase, which is called the Prado. So the whole sort of lower central area will be car free. And over there, so that's all in. That Prado is 35 acres, and the infrastructure is all in. There is a lot of building going on there right now. We sold a lot of the lots already. So you quite rapidly, that's going to be coming in, kind of into focus as yeah, it's something that's equally great in some places. I think maybe or in some ways even greater. A couple of one of the organizing principles over the Prado is these stair streets
Yeah.
because it goes up to about 80 meters of elevation, uh, and so those upper two roads have cars that are allowed. Uh, but to get down to town, if you happen to be living up there, you'll be able to go down these just gorgeous stair streets oriented toward the ocean view. And so we have a couple of projects underway there building the first two of those stair street things,
Yeah.
which are really kind of the highlight of the Prado, I think.
And I guess I was told that you have also like a system of funiculars or something that'll help people back up the hills.
There are within those stair streets, as sort of part of those projects, there are some funiculars to help people get up and down if they need some help.
So what's the modern version of a funicular? Because obviously the old version would have been an actual rail car on a railway that is manned by somebody at the top and the bottom.
Yeah, funiculars are a super fun topic, right? And we had fantasize at points along the way about doing some larger scale ones, more like what you're talking about, which you can see, in some cities still operating. These are more of the scale, sort of a residential elevator. It's just inclined, so they're all automated. Uh, it's still cool, but
Yeah.
maybe not as cool as the one you might have taken in Valparaiso or some city in Italy or in
Yeah.
or in
Yeah.
Pittsburgh. I understand they have some as well.
Yeah. I was actually just on one last year in Dubuque, Iowa, of all places. So
I bet, yeah, I went on that one.
yeah.
Part of one of my road trips.
Yeah, it was a really cool little experience. But
Yeah.
um, so another aspect, I do want to talk about the architecture and everything because that's obviously where my comments were directed. But thinking more at a basic level, you also then probably had to build a lot of your own infrastructure. I would imagine. Were there? What was it like having to figure out basic things like water and sewer and all of that on a fairly remote site like this?
You know, not as hard as I would have thought. If I look back at what's really been, the difficult parts of the experience, that wasn't it. Those systems are very well understood, solid technology with good professionals that understand how to build them. So we did have to build all that stuff. The only infrastructure of any kind that was on our 1,200 acres at the beginning was a very rough dirt road, which is a public road, which sort of comes through and then goes up and over a pretty good sized hill. So uh, we had to build a water system, and fortunately, we have wells and water on the property, wastewater systems, the electric, the main power lines were put in by the local electric, uh, authority, um, and of course we've had to take off, build all of that through the neighborhoods, fiber optic capability, all that stuff. Uh, it it's a lot. It adds up to be a fair amount of money, but it hasn't been troublesome. I would
Hmm.
say that's they've built the system. They've worked well. It hasn't been a source of a lot of headaches or anxiety.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, so on the architecture, obviously, um, one of the things that's always going to interest me about any project is the approach to architecture. And I think when you're in Las Catalinas, you're immediately struck by it's just a very beautiful place. The architecture, if you don't know where you are in the world and kind of close your eyes and then open up, you might imagine you're in an Italian hill town, or any number of places in the world that are more of a very moderate, a very temperate climate, um, with a certain kind of vegetation. Um, Obviously fits in really well in Central America as well. But talk to me about your thoughts and approach. Just thinking as a developer, and you're trying to create a certain kind of community. What were you thinking about when you approached the architecture?
Well, I should start with the urbanism. Our urbanism is incredibly complex, right? Uh, it's in three dimensions in a way that you you don't find very often.
Yeah,
Uh, your views are super precious and super valuable to homeowners and to whoever's using the homes. So the planning around that was very intricate and really just a super fun three-dimensional puzzle to work out. And at the end, it is a very, just looking at it from afar or from any any perspective, it is intricate. So one of the things we decided early on is that the architecture, for the most part, should stay pretty simple. Uh, and we have we have a code. Uh, in no place in it will you find your references to Italy or Spain or France or anywhere else. Now those places, our role models for the urbanism mainly were from those countries. Uh, our inspirations for the architecture less so. Our There are some good examples of materials and architecture in various places in Central America that were influential for us. I think the houses, our houses are different, uh, even just in their layout, than things you would find in Italy, because we're a more tropical place than
right.
Italy, certainly compared to some of the more northern places. So there's more of a desire for outdoor living. Uh, and so it's not it's a little bit of a new creation. I don't know of anywhere else where somebody has attempted to do this very compact, walkable urbanism while also having to optimize for the views and while also having to optimize for privacy. Um, and so at any given house, there are certain opportunities and certain constraints, right? You're probably on a slope. There's probably a primary view in one direction. Um, and so right away, you're going to want to orient the things that can enjoy the views in the right spot and put the more utilitarian things back in the more sort of less gifted parts of the house where it might be partially underground and not have much in the way of view, or might need to have not much in the way of openings in order to preserve privacy to somebody else. Um, so I think, those of us who've been working on Los Catalans, so over time, you got pretty good at sorting those things out pretty quickly. And when new architects have come along at the beginning, sometimes they seem just sort of horribly clueless about some of that, but then pretty quickly they can catch on as well. Um, there are things in the code like we don't allow big expanses of glass, uh, which is, I mean, the normal thing for a Costa Rica resort development would have it have these giant, expansive, pieces of uninterrupted glass because people think, oh, that's how I'm going to enjoy the view
Hmm.
most. And almost every house we review will have somebody trying to do that because they think that's going to be great. But I think a lot. If you think about a house at Los Feliz, you've got first of all, what are the materials, and we insist on certain natural materials. And then what are the openings like? Uh, is it a 30-foot wide piece of glass, or is it more traditional, taller than they are wide openings that like you would see in traditional architecture? Well, for us, it's going to be the latter, uh, and there certain things about the detailing of that. We say in there specifically that doors should be a real focal point, and they where possible should be surprising. You're surprisingly big, surprisingly small, just something great about them. And doors have, in fact, become a real sort of signature feature of Las Cataluñas architecture. But uh, that's most of it is what I just said. You got to the building layout is so critical. What the regulating plan was, to begin with, about who can be how high over here versus over here, so this guy can see over this guy, and this guy can see between the gap and between that one and that one. You get all that right. Um, have appealing, more natural materials. Get the doors and windows right. The roofs are almost all sort of traditional clay tile roofs. Um, you do all of that, and you're 90% of the way there.
Talk about how is that then? Obviously, there's a cost premium to build that way. Are there things that have offset it along the ways that make it not so like outrageously expensive to build? I mean, I just know building on slopes to begin with is you're already um, starting to get more expensive. But what are some of the things that you've done, or what have you seen as the impact on that on cost to build?
You know, there one of the things in the code is to have thicker walls, and that costs something. And in fact, over time, we have sort of moderated our stance on that just to keep it from being too expensive. Uh, the kind of windows and doors we started with are all locally made. You, they're the cheapest windows and doors you can get,
Hmm.
versus any factory made ones, and they look the best. Um, they're not the most airtight, and they're not the most soundproof. And over time, a lot of people have chosen other windows that are more sort of factory made and are you know, better for keeping the air conditioning inside, better for sound insulation, but they still look good. So there are uh, stonework is inexpensive where we are. Masonry in general is inexpensive where we are. Great ironwork and great woodwork. It's all of that's very relatively inexpensive versus what you find in the states. Um, and labor's less expensive. So there are a lot of things working in our favor. Building on a slope does have a certain cost, but I think people tend to overestimate how much that is. You get the foundation in, and well,
Hmm.
from that point on,
And
everything
yeah,
else
yeah,
it's the same.
yeah.
So the two small retaining walls are better than one that's too big. Certain principles like that can help sort of avoiding retaining walls where possible is great. Or if you do have to have them, just don't let any one be too big,
Yeah.
and that'll help. Um, the tile roof, none of these elements are really inherently expensive. So, the, working in tight uh, conditions, which we definitely have, where you can't just, be laying your materials all over the place in all this extra room that exists. That is challenging for the contractors, does increase costs. We do insist on uh, really following all of the regulations, including regulations about who your employees are and how they're documented and things like that. And not everybody does that. There is some expense to that, but just it seems like the right thing to do. But anyway, I don't think we're at a horrible cost, disadvantage because of any of that.
So you and I are in our little bubble of, you know, people who like these walkable communities and do urbanism, but I imagine the community attracts, you know, all sorts of people who are not in that bubble who just find it to be a cool place. What are you seeing, or what have you seen in terms of are there any interesting aspects of the kind of people that it's attracting, and what are people saying about it who are homeowners who stay there? What do you hear a lot?
I think it's something that really resonates with a person or not. I mean, clearly, Los Angeles is really, really different than most uh, developments of any kind. Um, and if you show up and you think, well, this is kind of neat, but your next thought is, where's my garage? You know, you're probably that's not who's going to buy a house at Los Angeles. So there is a very substantial sorting that happens, and I do think that pretty much everybody that's bought it's Los Angeles is very committed to the vision of what the town is supposed to be, urbanistically. I mean, you know, people have found other things to have disagreements about and so forth, as you might expect anywhere. But in terms of that central vision, I think what we're aspiring to is so obvious and has been so obvious for so long that that's not much of a source of any disagreements. It, I will say that uh, if people that are above a certain level of wealth, where they have become used to a very isolated, sort of protected, private lifestyle, they're probably not going to want to be in Las Catalinas because the whole point of Las Catalinas is this natural sociability and enjoying the people
Hmm.
around you. Uh, so, and there are exceptions to that, of course, but the kind of person who wants a really exclusive private club golf course community because of how private it will be and exclusive it will be, that they're that's not who's going to like Las Catalinas. That word exclusive gets used a lot in the resort real estate world, and yeah, I've always felt very strongly about that word. I do not want us to be exclusive. The point of Las Catalinas really is to be inclusive, um, and so they be all. And I think all of that is just intuitive, clear to
Yeah,
people. So the people who decide to come or even to visit, for the most part, they're already pre-bought in on all of that.
yeah. Anything really surprise you about like the people element and or aspects of the development along the way that maybe you didn't anticipate 15 years ago?
Uh, no, not really. I mean, a lot of people that our Los Catalinas homeowners are really, really a big part of it for them was the outdoor recreation potential that we have. They're heavy users of the trails,
Hmm.
and or the beach, the water, because you know, our our water is great water to really be doing stuff. Some beaches are great for just kind of lying on
Hmm.
and looking. Ours is maybe not as great for that, but it's great for actually swimming or riding the waves or going snorkeling or paddleboarding or other things. It's really well suited for that. So uh, that has certainly been the case. That we have attracted an unusually active group of people that really appreciate all that stuff, and it's really social.
Yeah,
We've attracted people that were looking for that.
yeah.
Um, so I think that's all more or less as anticipated.
Yeah, I think one of the things we noticed that was really great to see was just sitting around. You know, we're having lunch or something one day there in the sort of square in the center, and you've just got kids, you know, roaming around, riding bikes on their own in groups, and you know, there was even one point where we saw like a couple kids running around that were probably, I'm going to guess, 6 or 7 years old, and of course my wife's comment was like, "How old do you think they are?" You know, would we let our kids do that? And we're like, well, at home we wouldn't, but here we might.
Yeah, it takes a little while for people to let go. I think
Yeah,
when they if they're just visiting, people that live in there, it doesn't take long.
yeah, yeah.
I mean,
So
there
I'm,
was at a surprisingly young age.
yeah,
I mean, not just 6 or 7, but even 4 or 5.
hmm,
We got kids that just kind of have a run of the place.
yeah. So I mean, at least from your standpoint as the person who like created it, that must be a really rewarding part to see.
Oh, that makes me really, really happy. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think our high watermark so far for that was during those peak pandemic months. I mean, the border of Costa Rica was closed for 7 months or so, and
Hmm.
we our team did a really smart thing at that time, and we talked to a lot of the vacation homeowners as opposed to full-time resident homeowners and said, look, there's not going to be any market for short-term rentals, but can we try to rent your house for a longer-term rental? Which sort of, by definition, meant renting to people that were already in Costa Rica. And that was really successful.
Hmm.
And so lots of families moved to town rather than stay in San Jose or wherever they lived elsewhere in Costa Rica. And so we had our you know, kid population skyrocketed. Um, and so, there would be these nightly games of manhunt where there'd be this giant pack of kids, chasing each other around
Oh,
through
cool.
town. You might be eating dinner there in Ponciana, and all of a sudden, 25 kids were just coming here charging through. Maybe not everybody will enjoy that as much as I did, but I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And then the other thing that really caught my attention in talking to your salespeople was just how much more there is still to develop, and your future plans on the property was a lot more extensive than what I'd thought about. Is this? Do you think of this as like another 20 years of building? Is it? How do you imagine that?
I think at the beginning, my number was always 30 years, but we're already, let's see, 21. Oh, no, no, sorry, oh 06. We're at 18, I guess. Uh, if we can be finished in 30, that would be great. We have there a variety of neighborhoods sort of surrounding what's currently either developed or underdeveloped. You're kind of a little higher on the ridges. Um, we did sell to our northern neighborhood a pretty substantial hunk of land where a lot of our additional development was supposed to be happening, which it appears is unlikely to be developed now for at least for a long time. It's going to be serving more as some more undeveloped buffer land. And we're still using the trails out there, and I think we'll be likely to be doing that for a long time. And then the biggest piece of additional development we have is a place we call the Southern Highlands, which is it's not on the beach. It's up a pretty high, like a couple 100 meters high, most of it. Incredible views, but it's not walking distance to the main part of town. So whatever happens over there, I don't think we're certainly not really certain about exactly what is the reason for being and what makes that area special. I think there are various potential answers over there. What's drawn in the master plan is kind of a series of more hamlet scale uh, little bits of development, kind of following the ridge lines
Hmm.
more or less. But that would still a question mark. I mean, the area to be developed, I think, is what we always anticipated was, but exactly what is that? Uh, I think remains to be figured out.
You know,
And so I would love to be finished sooner rather than later. That probably means bringing in some other developers to take on parts of some of those parcels. Uh, but for a lot of reasons, including my own age,
hmm,
you know, which is now 66. Uh, Sooner is better than later.
one of the quirky things that we thought about while we're there, quirky because it's a it's a basically a car free community, but you have this aspect. It's not hard to imagine at all that the original part that you've built really becomes a regional destination, in time, that people driving there on purpose to spend a day or a night in the area. And which brings up the thought about like parking. Like, how do you have you thought about how you handle like potentially large crowds of people who come in that way, and how that changes how people interact with the community? I know it's been an issue. Like, if you think about Seaside, for example, which started as a very isolated, walkable community, and there's lots of like parking tucked in and around here and there, but now Seaside is sort of almost like the downtown of 30A,
Yeah,
and it attracts enormous crowds on a
yeah,
regular basis. And I guess putting my crystal ball on, it's not hard to imagine that happening for Las Catalinas as well.
yeah. And we don't want it to happen to an excessive extent, right? And in fact, limiting parking is one way to keep some control on that. Um, it seems to me that in any place, it's certainly in a smaller town, which we are. There's a balance that you need to have between the people that are really committed to that place, full-time residents, people that are staying there for extended bit of time, and the casual day trip kind of visitors. In a small town, if it's only the former, you know, it's probably going to feel a little stagnant and not that interesting. And you'd love to have some fresh blood coming along and some new people to meet. Um, but if there are too many of those casual day tripper people, I think it makes it really hard for the kind of community that we want to have happen. It makes it hard for that to happen.
Yeah.
Um, and the extreme example on the overdone side would be a little small town that is a cruise ship port and has these giant cruise ships that
Hmm.
show up, and that whole scene is extremely unappealing to me. So yes, there is a tendency, and that is an issue that we have had to deal with already. Some um, we, our recent completion of the improvements to the public road to have it be proper organized travel lanes and parallel parking and sidewalks and so forth. It helps a lot with some of the headaches. A lot of the headaches were just chaos out there. People just park in the middle of the street, then nobody can get anywhere. And
Hmm.
uh, but anyway, we have thought a lot about the quantity and location of parking. Um, we could have some satellite lots. In fact, we've done some of this on special event days where, for example, we've had some big triathlons at Las Catalinas, and on those days, people park way over on the other side of the hill and have to be brought over on some shuttle buses. Um, that could happen on a more regular basis, sort of as you approach town from either direction. Um, we could potentially have a parking deck in the location of the main parking lot. Um, I have tended to resist that for various reasons, including just sort of a little bit of a psychological aversion to parking decks. But an interesting example that I've experienced is a Portofino in Italy, which is a tiny little town, but super popular.
Hmm.
A lot of people want to go visit Portofino. And They do have a couple of very small parking decks, but the whole town is pedestrian only. Um, and so at the arrival point, is a very limited amount of parking, and it's basically at the end of the road. It's a dead end, and if you're approaching down the road, uh, actually, I drove on a recent trip. I stayed a few miles away with the family. I got up early, drove in, parked, no problem, looked around. But then when we wanted to go back later in the day, we started heading down that road, and there was a sign that said, "Sorry, parking's all full." And there was a policeman, forcing everybody to turn around.
Hmm.
And so we turned around, went back to where we started, parked the car, and got on a bus, and we
Hmm.
were still able to visit. So all of those things, I think, are potential solutions. In general, I don't stress out too much about that stuff because A, we don't know what's really going to happen, and B, the range of answers is going to be changing so
Yeah.
radically. I mean, several years ago, a lot of people thought that we might have loads and loads of fully self-driving cars, and that we wouldn't want to own our private vehicles anymore. We would just sort of use cars as a service. Of course, that hadn't happened yet, but
Yeah.
it might still happen in the years to come. There might be a lot less demand for parking, than has been typical in the past. So, and we don't know, to the extent we, how big of an issue that's going to be. So, we're just kind of handling it, day by day, year by year. And of course, in the long run, it's not going to be my decision. It's going to be the decision of the town council, uh, you know, run by the people who live in town.
So, it's been about an hour, and I want to be respectful of your time and move towards wrapping up. But I do wonder, I guess, as one last question, sort of reflecting on 20, 25 years or so of doing these projects. I'm thinking more about like what advice might you give to other people who want to do the same thing? Uh, uh, I guess we're not going to have a lot of people who are going to go buy land in Costa Rica and develop a community, but for people here in the States that want to do something, what's sort of your reflections on building these two communities, and um, what would you do next if you were looking to do a next project in the United States, for example?
I think my answer is going to be centered around car free. That's the thing that really takes these concepts of walkability and new urbanism from something that's a nice plus to something that's really transformative into the way you can actually live your life. And it doesn't have to happen on a giant scale. And I'm much more interested in it from a residential point of view than a commercial point of view. I think there are loads of places where car-free areas for commerce are wildly successful these days. But what you need is, for most locations, a place where the car it's nearby, but it's not right there where you're doing your living. Um, and so, and by the way, once you take the cars out of the urban footprint, your density easily doubles or triples because cars just they take a lot of room,
Hmm.
and the buffer zones and everything like that. My house at Los Angeles is directly right there, touching the street right away. I mean, who the hell would do that if there were cars on the street?
Yeah.
Nobody. Um, and the real core of Los Angeles Beach Town is, I say 5 to 10 acres. And in that 5 to 10 acres, even at sort of normal human, 2, 3, 4 story kind of levels of building height, you can have a lot. Some of the places that were most inspirational to me when studying and thinking about what to do at Las Colinas are so tiny. The town of Ez, which is this incredibly dramatic perched hill town in the south of France, the whole town's like 3 acres. But you can spend all day exploring Ez and have a great time doing it. Um, it's not the acreage of land, that sort of provides the experience of the place. I think it's the surface area of not just the roads, but all of the buildings that are surrounding you, or at least the first couple of stories worth of them. So I think you're doing things that are human scale, keeping the cars out of the areas where you're really doing your living, uh, that are of moderate, maybe 5 to 10 acres scale, could be super cool. And there are, the cars don't necessarily need to be in just one lot. There's a place I had the privilege of visiting up in Michigan called Wetquit-Tonsing. It's near Harbor Springs, and in that case, there are these alleys that have houses on either side, and then out the front door of those houses are these beautiful wide green areas with sidewalks, helping you get through. Um, and so if you live in one of those houses and you're there with your family, the kids can run out the front door, and they are in this quite substantial and very fun and interesting car-free world. And in that case, you out the back door is your car.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of room for creativity, and sort of adapting this concept to particular circumstances and opportunities. Um, but but having a place where you actually live, where you can come out of your door and be in a beautiful car-free zone, and where, especially if the first part of every trip for you involves doing that, it changes your life, um, in a way that normal new urbanism just doesn't. But it really does change your life. So I think that is worthy of all kind of additional exploration. And you know, I may well attempt another effort or two at that
Cool.
myself. But I
Well,
think that's a very fruitful area for
that
people
sounds
to
like
look
breaking
at.
news. So I'm glad to hear
Well, no breaking news.
that. Well, I hope that's the case. You've already done some incredible work, and it's remarkable to exceed. I always thought Glenwood Park was one of the best infill projects in the country. A really great example we used to take people to all the time, and Las Catalinas is pretty remarkable. And I know it's still got years and years to go, but it's already a pretty remarkable
Well,
community.
thank you. I do agree. I mean, I think it's the coolest thing anybody's built in a really long time, and I
Yeah,
think there are some real lessons to be had from it that I hope will be widely
yeah,
shared and used.
yeah, absolutely. So, well, Charles, thanks so much. How would you like, if anybody wants to track you down and find you or look up information about your communities? What do you suggest?
Well, I'd say go to the website and follow the links there. It's Las Catalinas CR, as in
Okay.
Costa Rica.com. But if you just remember Las Catalinas, you won't have any trouble finding us.
Yeah.
And the most important thing you do is come visit.
Yeah.
You can look at pictures all day and think about it, but nobody really quite gets it or understands Las Catalinas until they actually visit.
I would give that a hearty second because
Yeah.
I had seen a lot of pictures myself and studied the aerial maps and everything else, and it was very, very different coming to it
You
personally.
are, we are the ultimate example of a place where the marketing lags so far behind the reality.
No
I
doubt.
don't think there's anything we could do about it. You just, you can't really appreciate it without going.
Yeah. All right, Charles Brewer, thanks so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Bye.